speakers who are going to be speaking about some very important issues and ideas in our community and in our world. We certainly would like you to be the center of that. But firstly, we would like to, on behalf of the committee and on behalf of the organizers, I would like to welcome Nuruddin Farah, our distinguished speaker tonight and guest of honor. From all of us, please welcome to Ottawa. I think this city has a special place for Nuruddin because he's been here several times. And if you think of the size and the location of Ottawa, at the end of the corner, we're in a corner of the world, and I think to have Nuruddin visit the city several times is a real honor, and we're very pleased to have you. Somali Women's Circle Network, we have known them now for several years for their amazing community gatherings and awareness and information to the community. So thank you again for putting this together. And from that, I would like to invite Fawzia Ali to talk about the evening.
So welcome everybody. It's a great honor to be able to open this conference on behalf of the Somali Women's Circle Network in collaboration with Carleton's Institute of African Studies and the Department of English and Literature. So thank you all for taking the time out of this cold and long week to engage with us in a dialogue of gender equality and our campaign of I Matter. My name is Fawzia Ali, but my friends know me as Sia. I'm a student here at Carleton University studying criminology and psychology. To those who are new to our organization, like I said, we're known as the Somali Women's Circle Network. I can say I've watched the circle go from a creative idea amongst my aunts to an amazing organization that works to create awareness and dialogue among our community. 4 years ago, Dr. Idil Ladana, Naeem Ali, Ambassador Adil Ladana, Lucky Ali, and Fakir Abdi would have discussions and debates in our living room for months when they realized that everybody should be part of their discussion. They decided they needed to create a link to all Somali women around the world and give a platform for every woman's voice. They wanted to create change within our community, and after weeks of deliberation and collaboration, the Somali Women's Circle Network was formed. As an organization, we stand for empowering of the Somali women in society in order to end the suffering of the Somali people. As a young youth of the first generation, it was fascinating to me to hear my moms and aunts speak of the change that they wanted to see. They've always said that we have a strong voice. People just need to hear it. And when they do, change will happen. So 2010 to 2014, so 4 years later, our circle has accomplished a lot, which I can say I'm very proud of also. 2 months ago, with the Canadian Friends of Somalia, we had a dinner hosted for the Minister of Aviation, His Excellency Saeed Jama Ali. My aunt Dr. Idil Lebanon Saad, founder of the group, created the Global Prayer of Somalia campaign that literally went viral within days. It reached as far as the President of Somalia and called for his people around the world to pray for our Somalia. Last year, our conference of promoting Somali security of women, rights, give rights, gain justice was a great success also. Our keynote speaker was Batula Sheikh Ahmed Gabale. She's a chairwoman of Somali Women's National Organization. Another great accomplishment of our circle was when we stood up for women, when the current Somali government was being formed and fought for 30% of the members of parliament to be women. Our main missions for the circle are 4. 1, being create and support Somali women's leadership networks for peace and prosperity in Somalia. 2, establish partnerships with Somali women's organizations and activists that are working to enhance equality of the lives of Somali women in and outside of the country. Empowering Somali women to participate in political decision makings at all levels in order to enhance and protect Somali women's common interests. And 4, enhance Somali women's lives by sharing information inspirations, ideas, and opportunities created by women for women. I would personally like to thank my aunt, Dr. Idil Levina, and my mom, Ambassador Edin Levina, who's in India, both of whom couldn't be here tonight, for showing me the great opportunities that would come from joining the circle. Although I've watched the circle grow from the beginning, it wasn't until last year that I officially became the youngest board member of the group, and so far I can tell you that it's been an amazing ride. The reason why we're all here tonight: every year the Somali Women's Circle creates an event that falls within the 16 Days of Activism against gender violence. Generally speaking, gender violence is a global pandemic and is essential to any agenda to advance women's rights. We all know that we have to do much more to respond to the cries of justice of women and children who suffer from violence. Violence against women and girls is an extreme manifestation of gender inequality and systematic-based discrimination. The rights of women and children to live free of violence depends on the protection of their human rights and a strong chain of justice. The silence of violence against women has been broken. Now is the time for strong action. So tonight we have an amazing lineup of speakers, and they will continue the topic of gender-based violence. We also have the amazing and renowned international author, Nuruddin Farah, as our keynote speaker. We're absolutely lucky and honored to have him as part of this event tonight. His new book, Hiding in Plain Sight, is out, and he will also be speaking in regards to the new foundation, his new foundation. It's been an honor to be spearheading this event with my friend and fellow board member, Farah Hassan, and I hope you all enjoy tonight's lineup, and please make sure to save any comments or questions you have for the interactive portion of the evening. A big thank you to Mohammed Sofa, who is our MC for the evening. And again, on behalf of the Somali Women's Circle Network, I thank you for coming out.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I whisper, counting the sounds of my footsteps as I walk down the street late at night. 1, 2, 3. I stop whispering so I can focus more on making sure that the only sound of feet hitting the pavement are my own. I look over my shoulder, afraid of what I might find. I look over my shoulder, afraid of seeing a shadow other than mine, but all I see are the bright street lights and a second shadow next to mine. I begin to subconsciously quicken my steps, trying to run without catching the attention of this person I'm praying is not male. My heart beats so hard, I fear he may hear my fears and use them against me, and I cannot risk this because all the odds are already in his favor, so I slow down because faster steps are louder. I build up enough courage to look over my shoulder once again, and then I realize that the second shadow is mine as well. I breathe in but not out because I still haven't reached my teeth, so I listen more carefully just to make sure I'm alone. Yes, I conclude I am. I'm unsure if this is a blessing or a curse, so once again I look over my shoulder, afraid of what I might find. I have been looking over my shoulder for 5 years, since the day I held my best friend tight as she told me she was raped. Since the day I started questioning if all people were really human, because how could anyone with any humanity ever commit such a felony? One day I brought up my feelings to a friend, and she laughed and said, "Barua, you dress so modestly, there's no need to worry." Oh, the sour taste of irony, and all I can think is, so are you saying that all rape victims dress provocatively? Because she was 7 when her heaven shattered because she was already living through hell. So I asked myself why. Why? Because we live in a society that chooses to blame the victim when it's easier than finding a solution to the bigger problem. And you may say, no, we're living in the 21st century, though. We are educated, we are logical, we have morals. So tell me then, why is it that for every article about a rape victim, you'll find her age, her level of intoxication, her career, and her education, and possibly even an outfit description, as if any one of those things give another person the right to take ownership over her body? We live in a society where women are ashamed of their own bodies, so only 54% of rape victims will ever approach authorities, but as soon as a laptop is stolen, people speak up almost immediately, as if owning an electronic is more important than owning ourselves. I have been fighting for custody over my body since the day the midwife announced female. So forgive me for sounding so bitter, but I can already hear my little sister's cries when she told me about her best friend. In the future, when I tell my daughter that her body is hers, will she call me a liar? Because I already know that she, like me, will be looking over her shoulder.
Thank you for that generous introduction. When we got a note that looked like a very simple note from Fozia about having this event, collaborating on this, we didn't have much choice than to put heads together. So I'm wearing two caps tonight on behalf of Carlton as faculty in the Institute of African Studies and the Department of English, which also have joined in supporting this event. So by wearing those two caps, I think our guest writer and the very distinguished Norwegian Ferrari is our home in two departments in Carlton, in African Studies and in English, two areas where he straddles in addition to creative writing in his very rich career. Trying to introduce the guest writer within so short a time, especially when we have some other arts, it's like trying to hold you out for a while because his credentials are enormous. But I want to point out that I met Norwegian Farah for the second time yesterday, and I reminded him that we had met, in 2000 when Professor Chino Achebe, may so rest in peace, marked his 70th birthday. And I have since had to write a tribute in which I have a little surprise embedded in it for Nuruddin, and that would also show him later. But there are a lot of coincidences about his life. His life reads like fiction itself in many ways. His first book began, the story about a nomad girl who runs away rather than getting involved in an arranged marriage. That sense of exile has dogged his life because events in his homeland has made him go into settled post-exile. And he is in every sense a global man, has lived in about 11 countries, holds about 3 international passports, and continues to live in various countries that we might be asking where you're going to be next. And he's at home in all of these nations, but more importantly, he carries with him in all that he does that spirit, that African spirit, that human spirit that allows him to continue to tell stories wherever he is. He's a natural storyteller. And I do not want to mention, I try not to mention in association with very distinguished writers from the post-colonial world that they have been Nobel Prize nominees, because sometimes it appears like something of an insult, as if winning such an exalted prize is a way of actually affirming their distinction. But it helps to also acknowledge that Professor Farah has been nominated for the Nobel Prize, but he has also won so many other important prizes. He is at home wherever he goes around the world, and in his soul is our continent, Africa. I can't do more because rather give the arts to him today. I also want to, on behalf of the Institute of African Studies and the Department of English, welcome you all to this event. Being here today in spite of the weather, especially in the university at this time of the year, I'm sure Carlton students know what I'm talking about. The term is rounding off and the exams start next week or just thereabout. Some means a lot. So without much ado, I would like to welcome all of you to Carlton, and more importantly to say that indeed we are honored to have you here with us, and we're looking forward to a very exciting evening. Welcome, and I will say it in my native tongue, the Igbo of Nigeria, Noah, where he has also lived and knows, I'm sure he knows what I've just said. If those of you don't, it means I've spoken the coded language to him because he lived and taught in Nigeria for a couple of years. Noah, welcome, Professor Farah.
Thank you.
Well, welcome, and since Nuke welcomed us in his native language, I'd like to welcome you all in Somali. So Dawada. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge this beautiful space that we're in, because Naima and I were students not too long ago, and I'm sure that lecture halls didn't look this beautiful. So, I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize the organizers of this event, the Somali Women's Circle Network, the Institute of African Studies, and the Department of English at Carleton University, Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to continue this very important and timely dialogue. I also want to thank the audience that came out today. I know several people mentioned that it's quite cold outside, but as Mohammed was saying, we live in Ottawa, one of the coldest capitals in the world, so we need to have a stiff upper lip, like the British would say. Right? So as many of you might be aware, before I begin, I'd like to take a moment, because tomorrow marks the 25th anniversary of the Montreal Massacre. So I'd like to just take a moment of silence, just to acknowledge the 14 women that have lost their lives in that tragic incident. I think, never like any other time in our history, I think we're at a real crossroads with the issue of sexual violence and rape and violence against women. Over the last month and couple of months, we've seen a public discourse about rape and a dialogue go viral on social media. So 2 quick Twitter hashtags that I'd like to quickly highlight is hashtag why I stayed and why I left. It's a social media public campaign that was debated as a result of the Ray Rice incident. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Ray Rice, he's an NFL football player who punched his wife violently in an elevator. And that created a debate online, which was huge. So for the first time, you have millions of people, not just women, talking about this issue of why they stayed and why they left. The other incident, the other hashtag that's gone viral recently has been hashtag been raped, never reported. Again, this is a result of the whole Giangomeshi scandal that I will not get into today, but I'm sure that we're all embroiled in one way or the other. So again, we're seeing millions of women chive in this public debate about being sexually assaulted and why they didn't report it. So not reporting is a social phenomenon that most people don't understand. And it's troubling to hear that the amount of women who don't report being sexually assaulted, but it's equally important to hear and inspiring to hear that there's a public discourse that's been opened up about this now. So many people, we've had so many people speaking about this. And just to paint a local picture here in Ottawa, as Mohammed was saying, I work for an organization called Crime Prevention Ottawa, so I thought it was only fitting to dig up some of the stats that we have. And it's quite alarming. The number 1 call that police respond to here in Ottawa is sexual assault and partner assault. So, and yet you hear such huge volumes of money pumped into things like fighting drugs, but the number 1 call volume is sexual assault and sexual violence. So in 2003, and these are quite recent, from January 1st to June 30th, 2003, there have been 296 reports of sexual violence for under 16. That's just under 16 stats. For sexual assault, from January, again, at that same time to June 30th, the numbers are 149 numbers. So it's quite alarming. And for that same period, again, there are 88% of these people, the victims are women, and only 3% are men. So it's quite alarming to see the statistics right there. Now, another thing that we're hearing in the media quite often is also, in the House of Commons debate, so this is another thing that's quite mind-boggling. Here in the Parliament Hill, we don't have a policy to address sexual violence. We're, sexual harassment, right? It's unbelievable to think in this day and age that we don't have a policy at the Hill to address this issue. So the combination of public conversation taking place right now is something like we've never seen, and I think it's an opportunity to seize the moment. However, we must also be mindful and not forget the foundation laid by the second wave of the women's movement, right? A lot of the groundwork has been done, but the discourse is taking place right now. So it's a good opportunity to engage and continue this dialogue. And for many years, the issue of violence against women has been discussed as solely a women's issue. But as of late, in the last few years, there's been a shift to include men in this dialogue. While most perpetrators of violence are men, most men are not perpetrators. When I started to reflect on this talk today, and I spoke to somebody from the Somali Women's Circle, one of the things that I started thinking about was a story that I came across a year ago. And I'd like to share with you. The story was about this young boy who was in Nova Scotia, grade 7 young boy who was being bullied by these 2 other young men in his classroom. So as the boy continued to get bullied, he would go home and cry and say, you know what, I'm having it really tough. So his parents, good parents that they are, they advocate in the school system, but the pattern still continued. So one day in his class, this young girl observed the changing behavior of her classmate, and she said, you know what, have you ever thought of writing a letter to express how you feel to these bullies and maybe post it on Facebook? So the young boy wanted to try anything to get rid of his bulliers. So he went home that night, and he went online and really described how terrified he was, how he cried, and how they succeeded in making him feel miserable. So the letter created a buzz online, and within 10 or 15 minutes, there were 100 likes on his page, and over 60 people had shared the same story within his school, in his little network that he had. So the next day when the young boy showed up at school, he showed up to a group of his classmates opening the door for him and applauding him while he came into the school and saying, we appreciate you, we like you. So, and if you have any other issues with these bullies, we'll make sure that we stand up with you and we stand up to protect you against these bullies. So this got me really thinking about, where this young girl would get the tools to advise him to write a letter. This young girl gave him the space and the opportunity to share his feelings about it, to share his feelings because it's acceptable for young women to express their feelings in a way that young boys aren't told or taught to express their feelings. So you see, young girls are taught at a young age to share their feelings and perhaps even keep a diary. So for young boys, they're expected to kind of fit in this thing called a man box. You got to be tough. You got to make sure that you fight back. So this imaginary box that you're taught to fit in is something that we need to debunk. So how do we as a community address this issue and counter the narrative of this man box? So I'm just going to share a few things, and then I'll get into the campaign, and I promise I'll end. I know we're a little behind schedule. We must do more to curb the mixed messaging that young boys get of what it is to be a man. This tough, strong man that earns respect by disrespecting women, young men need to define their own masculinity on what it means to be a tough, strong man. We need to create a safe space for young boys and men to have these conversations. This is certainly a great initiative today, but how do we turn this conversation about engaging young men and boys into everyday talk? How do we bring this into our living rooms? How do we bring this into the hallways that we teach in schools to make sure that the conversation keeps going beyond today? The other thing is, social media, the two social media strategies that I kind of referred to were no mistake. I think, social media has a huge, huge role here. We need to be creative in the way that we engage young men and boys, to not be bystanders and to be active. So social media is certainly an option. The women's movement has done a remarkable job fighting for equality rights and for women. So it's great that men are being engaged in the dialogue for the first time, but I think as men, we also need to take a step back and let the women take the lead in this one. And we need to sit back and figure out how we can support the women take the lead on this. We need to engage men from diverse backgrounds so they take on this message to end violence against women and explain it in a culturally appropriate way. Because there's things that I don't know about the Nigerian culture that in UK might be able to express, right? So engaging men from various backgrounds is quite important. Finally, I'd like to share a project that I've been involved with over the last year. The campaign is called I Can Manifest Change. It's an initiative that Ottawa Coalition to End Violence Against Women, Crime Prevention Ottawa, and the Ottawa Police Services have partnered on. It's a local campaign that is really part of a larger global movement taking place right now to end violence against women. He for she, it's on us, make your move, draw the line, white ribbon, and man up are some of the other initiatives that are going on globally and here locally in the city. So how do we leverage this group of men, individuals to manifest change? We've just had a small idea to do this through a social media campaign by asking men and asking you today and really challenging you to take a pledge. So before I leave this event today, I want all the men and young men here to take the pledge to end violence against women. It's quite simple. So I brought this right here, this banner here. So I'm again challenging all the men in the room before I turn this over, and I'll get the ball I'll get this ball started and I'll get the ball rolling here, to take my own selfie and make a pledge. So it's simple. We have a website called icanmanifestchange.ca for anyone that's interested in doing so. And I'll take the first pledge, and my pledge is I can manifest change by recognizing and being accountable for my own privileges as men, for my own privilege as a man, and supporting the cause that empower women and other marginalized groups. There you go. You have my stuff.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great honor to be here tonight to speak to you in this very personal and emotional topic, violence against women. As I frequently travel to Somalia and neighboring countries which we have to pass by, people usually ask violence against women or the violence in Somalia. I think if you type women and violence in Somalia, even in combination in Google, let alone doing any big research, you'll find tons and tons of articles. From one of the recent ones, 2012, 2013, the UNDP and UN Women, an article titled Violence in the Lives of Girls and Women in Somalia. It just gives you the statistics of all the rape and everything happened from all the different regions in Somalia. But I would like to take this in a different take. For me, what I believe is violence against women is actually man's issue. It's not women's issue. And the reason I said that is it's very obvious, but at the same time, I want you to take a trip with me going back to historically Somali men and how they treated women. And the time is very short, so I've been told to keep it short, or actually even making shorter than my 15 minutes. I would like to look at this in two components. One is cultural perspective, and one is in the Islamic perspective. In cultural perspective, if you go back before the war, and I'm going to be switching back and forth in Somali, so you have to bear with me. Ragga Soomaaliyeed waxaa lagu yaqaanay inay dumarkooda garab istaagaan. Actually, ninka ragga waxaa lagu qiimeyn jiray ninka walaashii iyo reerkiisa iyo xaaskiisa iyo kulli daafaca protect gareeya. Some of the famous things in Somali, men used to take a pride in Somali men was protecting and providing for their families. It was kind of shame if you even look at the historical perspective in Somalia for a woman to earn and work and provide for the family, because that was something that our men did and was good at it. Now, of course, every culture has ups and downs, and when I say that, I'm talking about matter of the general perspective of the majority of Somali men. There was a simple balance that a family in a household, that Somali women were not irrelevant or submissive or homemakers. They still were part of the economy. They were still part of the decision making. They still sometimes get the last word of whatever decisions they want. But at the same time, the protectors and the providers of the family were men. So that was a bit before the war happened. So we have an aftermath for the Civil War of 1990 up until now, almost to 24 years. We are with our government, with our institutions, from one transition to another. So that 24 year of civil war changed basically everything. The natural interdependence of Somali family and men being the house, the provider and protector, everything changed. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this, and one might ask that, what has that got to do with the violence against women? Well, I have a point, and the point is that men is the issue of violence against a woman is not a woman's issue, it's men's issue. So what costs the Somali women, the Somali men, who was the protectors and providers, if you look at these statistics, it breaks your heart for what's going on in Somalia. And I was just being in Somalia less than a year ago. as I talk to the students and go to universities and you go to communities, this is very obvious of what's going on. And of course, there's a lot of good men who still provide for their families, who still does not commit any violence against a woman. But when I say that, violence against women and men is the perpetrators, I'm talking about the majority. So what caused? After the Civil War happened, there was a breakage in the family. A lot of men sent their children and their wives and the elders to the safety, and that's what any good Somali man will do. So we ended up a lot of families without a father, single mothers in Europe, in North America, and even here in Canada. So that relationship of what the traditional support system within family mean has been broken. Now, because a lot of mothers and families became providers by themselves and living without a father, a lot of women stepped up the plate, becoming the breadwinners of the family. So there is a shift of the responsibility traditionally, the role of what was the role of men and what was the role of women. Now, the image of men, ninka ragga maxaa lagu yaqaana nin reerkiisa u shaqaysta, caruurtiisa u shaqeeya, iyagii protect garayso, haddii taasi isbedelay maxaa meesha ka soo baxay marka? And the balance has been interrupted, and that interruption in balance, it affects men's self-image, it affects men's responsibility, and again, I'm just generalizing. We're talking about there's a lot of unemployment in our country. So the authority of even men being the person who's authority in the house has changed, because now the mothers are filling in the shoes of the responsibility of the men. So then where do we go from here? All these violences, all these problems rock the boat. We have men killing other men. Like some of the most important elements that we need to highlight is violence is not only against the women. The violence of men is also violence against other men. Nimbaninku ka ixtiraam badan yahay ama nimbaninku ka magac dheer yahay maanta hadduu wadankii tago waa la dilaya. Sida dumarku ay ugu jiraan danger of maxay ahayd toole violence ayay ragguna ugu jiraan. Markaynu ka hadlayno dumarka dhibaatada ku dhacaysa iyo violence-ga maxay ahayd toole loo geystay, waa inaynu also eegnaa wiilasha loo geystay, wiilasha yaryar xabadaha loo dhiibayo ee dagaalada gelaya, ee gabdhaha yaryar guur aysan diyaar u ahayn la gelinayo, ragga la dilaya maanta ninka intuu wadankiisii tago ama magaaladiisii tago si xorriyadna uusan u mari karin. So we have violence caused by men, but go into different folds that is affecting everybody. So the question is, we need to assess all these problems and see what is the root cause of this. To protect the women and Amazon to teach that how to do self-defense and this and that is not going to solve the problem. Now, how do these men justify for what they do? One is that if you lost all of your identity as a man, and I'm talking about majority back home, and you have no employment, and there's a lot of shift, and you lost your authority, maybe that could be one way, still doesn't justify. But what is worse than that is that when people use religion to justify their violence. So, according to the Gardner 2007, Julia, the report she wrote called Gender Profile in Somalia, quote, she said, Somali customary law recognizes the rights of men, but limits the rights of women. Sharia law offers women for the greater justice, but only to be administered by men. In practice, it's reported often women are disadvantaged by their lack of education and poor knowledge of the Quran. So now, not only that we have a problem in the aftermath of a war, we have a breakage of a family system, but we also have that women who are being abused and being told that it's based on this is what Islam is saying. Now, if we go back to the principles of Islam, which I'm just going to glance a little bit of it, We know that Islam condemns violence against women, no matter what the circumstance is. There's no exception to it. We know that the Prophet Muhammad talked about it over and over, even during the war, that you have to make sure that children and elderly and women are safe. For example, most of the time people will say that, oh, man can beat his wife. He would have to discipline her. So it's really shameful for Somali Muslims to use unjustifiable and cruel behavior and to justify it in the name of religion. And that could be female genital mutilation, and it could be a rape, or it could be a man who is beating his wife. Unfortunately, this is something very common, and it does happen. I'm sorry, but we have to be honest. And I have seen it when I went back in our country. Another main problem that I see when I travel in the country is that some Quranic translators, and maybe this is also with the rest of the Muslim countries, that they project culture in order to control women, and they project culture to translate Quran. And that is a huge mistake. You cannot quote an ayah from the Quran and say that a man can beat his wife. It's just absolutely unacceptable. Now, while men and women are considered equal in God's eyes, we have different roles. And I think that Dr. Jamal Badawi, in his paper, Status of Women in Islam, he details in that how we are equal on the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but different. And each one of us has roles and responsibilities to do. It's, for example, like if you, as Dr. Jamal Badawi explains, is like if you have $100 and you put one bill of $100 in one pocket, and then on the other pocket you put 5 20s, the value is the same. You have 100 and 100, but the composition of the money is different. So that's how I understood, and that's how Dr. Jamal Badawi explains on men and women. The equality of them is they're the same in value, but they're different. God created them different. Also in Islam, men and women are both distinguished and honored. So there's, regardless of what happens, regardless of how culture changes, regardless of how war changes, regardless of if we ended up in the refugee camp, or if we ended up in Canada, or if we are in Somalia, regardless of where we are, on the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, men and women are honored by their gender, race, ethnicity, and the only thing that makes one person better than the other, the Quran mentions there is a way that you can tell who is better than what, is actually for your God consciousness, your taqwa. How God conscious you are is what makes you better than the other person. It's not men is better than women. It's not that white or black or any race is better than anybody else. So that's very important, regardless of any situation that we're in, regardless of who's paying the bills, regardless of who is running the household. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa khalaqnakum shu'uban wa qaba'il ta'arafu inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. I'm just going to add a few more points to conclude. Also, it is in the Quran that both men and women have obligations. It's not only that one has to do one and we don't have to do the other. That men and women both are mutually, they have an obligation. We have an obligation to forbid the evil and to support what's good. And one of that is even Surah Al-Asr explains تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَلَى الْمُنْكَرِ. And that is a responsibility for all of us to do. Another thing that I wanted to conclude is that there's a lot of ayahs in the Quran that you can actually follow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lists it. The God-fearing women and the God-fearing men and the men who praise and the female who praise. And that shows you that there is no preference of gender or anything. So we really have to, women have to learn and to go back and understand their Quran and their religion. There's no way that we can get away with an excuse. Somebody else has to tell you, I'm going to abuse you for the name of religion because this is what it says. It's absolutely, it's the 21st century. You got to know your religion that you're claiming that you are Muslim for. So we know Islam condemns all forms of violence against the women. It is also that not justifiable anywhere in the Quran for any kind of degree to do a violation or abuse of women. I'm just emphasizing. The second important book that Muslims follow other than the Quran is the Hadith. And the Hadith is the Prophet ﷺ's habits and what he said and how he lived, which he was the model of the Quran. So when some people are arguing, is this ayah going to allow if a man can beat his wife or not? That's not even the question. If you're not sure that one word that you want to know what the meaning of it is, go back to the Prophet ﷺ and see how he lived. He never beat a wife or children or anyone. He was the most merciful person that you can imagine. He is our role model. So we have to look at the Quran in a more context than people just projecting the Quran in their culture. Now, the question is that what is our responsibility as we sit here today? And you already took the pledge, and you're going to be, posting your picture and selfies. Can I do it without a picture, Bada? Okay.
These are your sons.
Oh, okay, there you go. So now, what is our responsibility as citizens who are maybe Somali descent or Canadians who are sitting here? And qof kasta oo wadankii maanta joogta maxaa nala gudboon dhibaataa jirta qarsoodi maaha gabdhaheeni maalin walba in la xoogo really ma rabin inaan akhriyo waxyaalaha laga soo qoray ama Amazon ha samayso ama cid kale ha samayso sax ma aha in laga aamuso ilaahay wuuna qabsanayaa haddii kuwa aanan hadli karin aynan u hadlin lacag wadankii keliya loo diro ma aha inay wax bedelayso waxa anaga aan qabano ama aan qorno ama aan ka istaagno also wax bay bedelaysaa. So what do we need to do? What steps? For me, I think the Somali community leaders, and especially men is the one who cause violence. I'm not picking on men. I have 10 brothers, alhamdulillah, and 60 plus men cousins. I'm a big fan of men. But unfortunately, men causes violence to themselves and to women. That's the whole original violence against women because men caused it. So what do we need? We need men. We're going to support. When women talk about violence against women, people say, women always whine, complain, talking again. But when men talks about it, when Sharmarka was talking about it, I wanted to listen. Because always there's a woman who's talking about violence against women. So we need men to talk. We need community leaders to talk. We need to educate our boys. First men talking, first boys getting educated in order to stop this. Maybe next year we will have something happen. We know boys look for men as a role model. So the definition of, I think, and I could be wrong, the definition of what Somali men is changing culturally. So you guys need a new definition, seriously. Roles has changed. We all travel. We either in Western, in Europe, or in Ethiopia, or in a refugee camp. Things has changed. So the old days and cultural things ain't working anymore. We need a new definition. We need new men, and there's there might be a small percentage, but there's a lot of good men who still provide for their families, who stand up for the violence against women, who say it's unacceptable, it's unacceptable, it's unacceptable. We need those men to help us and stand the platform and be a role model for the girls and for the boys. And also one thing I wanted to conclude is we need to stop victimizing the victims. It's like, maxay tiri, maxay u hadashay, balaaya kugu dhacday, aniga rabtaa inay ceebayso, dowladday rabtaa inay ceebayso, raggay rabtaa inay ceebayso, xagee ka timid, yaa dhalay, ina ayay ahayd. We need to stop victimizing the victims.
It's a pleasure to be here in Ottawa. Many people, many of my friends in Toronto continue asking me why it is I come back here all the time. It's probably because you allow me to speak. And I thank you very much. Made friends over the years and it's always very welcome. But I couldn't find my way back to my hotel if I chose, which is something I should do something about. In other words, instead of only coming for half a day and then going back. The subject interests me a great deal. And it only not only does it interest me, this subject, violence against women, but I have written about it quite so often that I think much of my work is about violence against women or responses to it. And it's probably something to do with this, that my daughter, Abian, at the age of 11, wrote a story which won her the best prize for a young writer in South Africa. She was 11 years of age, and she wrote a fantastic story which was published in South Africa. The entrance to this particular competition, there were 35,000 people who entered for this prize. And at the age of 11 and a half, she won the story. She won the prize with the story that I'll tell you now. And then I'll tell you also my own reaction to the story, because I had a personal reaction to the story as a father. The story is about a man whom a child calls uncle. A man, older man, comes to the house, rings the doorbell. A little girl, age 13, 14, allows him to come in because she calls him, "Hello, uncle, how are you?" And then he says, "Hello, uncle." "Hello, so-and-so," the little girl's name. She allows, the little girl allows this man into the house. But she says, as she's walking into the living room, she says, "Mom and Dad are not here." And then he says, "When are they coming back?" "Oh, they're coming back this evening. And are you the only one?" "Yes, I'm the only one." And then that man, whom she called the uncle, it's not a story, it's a fiction, rapes the little girl, the 13-year-old girl. When she won the prize, when she first wrote it and then obviously entered the prize without my seeing it, afterwards I said to her, "Where does this come from?" Because I became a father at that time, and then I really and truly wanted to know, where did it come from? Now, it may have come either from a story that she had heard, because she assured me nothing of the kind happened to her. It may also have come from the fact that my former wife, her mother that is, 10 years earlier had written a book called Domestic Violence Among the West Indies in Britain. Now that could have been one of the connections. The other connection could have been any of my books. So if somebody is young, growing up in a household in which a subject comes up quite often, the warnings are sounded quite often, one becomes aware, one can think about this, one can tell a story about it. Now, the story that I wrote many, many years ago, which I have told many times, and if you don't mind it, I'll tell it again. At the age of 9, when I was a letter writer for people who did not know how to read and write, and this is 60 years ago, a man came to me to ask me to write a letter on his behalf because he didn't know how to write. And he was, paying for the service of writing the letter for him. And then he said to me that his wife had gone away, and although she promised she would return in a week, in a month probably, she chose not to return. She stayed on and on with her parents, refusing to come back. And then the man said to me, and I am 9 years of age, he said to me, write it down. I want you to write to this woman and to tell her that if she does not come back within 30 days, I'm going to come to the town where you are living, and I'll break every bone and drag you all the way from Beledweyne, where she had taken refuge, to Cadaalad. And upon being told this, the punishment that she would meet if she didn't come back, I wrote, if you do not come back in 90 days, you may consider yourself divorced. Now, I cannot tell you, apart from being mischievous, and I'm being honest, I cannot tell you apart from being mischievous at the time, and also apart from knowing that women were continually beaten. And I can say it now because they're both dead, and may God bless them, my parents. I can tell you that my father quite often did not hesitate to use violence against anyone, not only against my mother, but against boys, against the girls, against everyone. So because violence was present in every sense of the term, and there was seldom any communication, loving communication between the children and the parents. And so, being raised in that sort of a household, I feared for this woman's life. And I said, more or less, the message was, don't come back. And she did not come back. And she took the 90 days as 90 days, and then stayed on, went to the Qadi of the town, had herself divorced, because officially, if you have such a letter written in Arabic, because I wrote a letter in Arabic, it became carte blanche. She took it to the judge, and the judge declared her divorced, on which she found herself a husband who was kinder to her, who hasn't beaten her up. And then he turns up after 6 months and says, what happened? I sent you a letter that if you didn't come back, I was going to break up and drive. And then he learned the fact that she was already married to somebody else. And when he questioned how could she be married to 2 men, The letter was brought as evidence. You see? The letter that I wrote was evidence, and because it was written in Arabic, and I come from a society in which Arabic is not, well, many people don't speak Arabic, it is respected. Now that is the story that I wrote at the age of 9. I'm now 69, 60 years ago. And it means that if something is forever present, it will be present in an everyday sense, if something is present in an everyday sense. It will also be present in the lives of people, in the stories that people tell. Now, it's quite shameful, I think, as a Somali, to say how disturbing it is that we as Somalis, men or women, do not take the issue of rape quite seriously. I've forgotten to thank my hosts who've kindly invited me here, and I spoke yesterday evening with a few members of the Somali Women's Circle Network. And I'm also delighted to note that there are men amongst the Somali Women's Circle Network. And I also believe, and I hope my trust is worthy in investing in some of the people who are members of this group. But I'm hoping that the men will not take over, because when men come into a circle of women, they sometimes take over and dictate the mission and give direction to the movement. And this is a warning to Sharmarke. Well, first of all, it is necessary for men to be on board for anything that concerns any concept that has something to do with the betterment of the entire society. It doesn't only affect women. Rape doesn't affect only women, but it affects everyone. And for that reason, it is necessary that there is the notable presence of men participating in that particular thing. In the same way as I would have also liked, many, many years ago, for men to participate also in the crime, the barbarous behavior, the Somali barbaric behavior, or female circumcision, and so on and so forth. Because we must be carrying this society forward to a better condition, much better than the situation is at the moment. I was most highly impressed with Rua El-Din's poem, a very beautiful poem, well thought, well considered, well conceived, and to remember, I look over my shoulder. In other words, there is no safety. There is no safety other than in numbers. There is no safety other than in lit areas of the world. There is no safety. There is fear. There's, and for one to live daily with this fear must be something. And it takes courage for somebody to come out. There is a Somali poet who lives in England, whose name is Warsan Shire. She's one of the best. She's written several of the best poems about violence against women. And I wish the women here would invite Warsan Shire so that she can share some of those experiences, some of those poems. She lives in London. And she was a poet laureate, young poet laureate, recently appointed. Now, in which a woman is raped, And when she is raped, marriage is legitimized. Marriage is legitimized. How is it legitimized? A woman is raped, the family of the woman, the girl, will come together. They will negotiate. They will negotiate with the man who raped her, and occasionally even pay him money to marry the woman. Instead of taking him to court, instead of doing terrible things to him too, the family asks the criminal, appeases the criminal by asking him to marry. And then he marries, and very often he marries her for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, so that the child is not born out of wedlock, illegitimate, as it is called. And once the halal, the child is halal, then they say, you can divorce her. The victim. And can you imagine such a man going into a bedroom with a woman? You can't imagine affectionate relationship between the. I can't imagine it. I mean, it's a horror story. It's a daily story that happens on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, every time. And all the other talk of Somalia, reconciliation, national reconciliation, there has never been any talk. Our boys were killed. But no one ever talks about our women who were raped. Where is the justice in that? Behaving this way? If we're legitimate, if we're behaving in this barbaric way. But we are, I'm glad to say now, we are improving a little in the sense that we have a society of women here in Ottawa and in a number of other places who are working harder and harder so that lives of those other people who have survived humiliation and rape and other things may survive. It's a very, very difficult thing. It's something that's worth thinking about. It's something of which we must be ashamed that we haven't picked it up many, many years ago. And I remember when I published my first novel about 44 years ago, many of you in this hall were not even thought of, let alone born. The people who were at that time living in Mogadishu thought that I was a betrayer. I was described as a traitor because I had written about two things. One, female circumcision and how barbaric it is. We're talking of 1970, 1968, I wrote a novel. And then we also talked about a woman, Ebla, who, in his idiotic wisdom, her grandfather gives her off in marriage to a man his age and accepts a couple of camels as part exchange. And then when she runs away in search of safety, her cousin sells her to a man who rapes her on the first night and becomes the husband. Now this is continuously the stories of many, many Somali women. So when you combine female circumcision with continuous rape, and then the impossibility of producing healthy children later in life, I'm absolutely amazed and I'm full of admiration for Somali women who have remained strong despite the horrors that have been visited on them. And I've written about them, and I remember interviewing many, many men and women for a book of mine called Yesterday, Tomorrow. And the only people who were worthy, whose stories were worthy being repeated, were the stories of the women, because Somali men were, are, and will remain useless for the rest of their lives. talking about politics and nothing else but politics. Instead of talking about the things that matter to their women, to their children, to their daughters, we're always talking about, we have our umbrella up when it rains in Mogadishu, without caring what happens next door to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much.
Nadine and some of her friends and colleagues have created a foundation, and this fund is for Basra's story will be told through Monique, and we'll learn more about her. But one of the things we're going to do tonight is honor her work and also create a legacy for what she stood for. Our speaker is coming from Montreal, I believe, and Monique Lortie is she's an educator. She's involved in in human rights, and she works with diverse communities. And she'll be here with us to share a bit about Basra and what she stood for. And after that, Ottawa actually, and with Nuruddin and some of the members, we will launch the Basra Farah Women and Children Fund, which we will gladly, hopefully, will carry on the torch and the work that was done. So, Monique.
Bonsoir et merci de m'accueillir. Je m'appelle Monique Lortie and I'm very pleased to be with you. It's an honor and it's a great honor and privilege also to talk to you about a dear friend of mine, one of Nuruddin's dearest sister. I met with Basra in the autumn of 1979. She was at the time, she was a student at the Eastern Michigan University studying nutrition. Basra was she was born Somali. She was a very, very proud Somali woman, as you know them, strong, proud. And I remember, and everybody who's known Basra remembers her. From the time you met that strong woman, you never forgot her. You would always remember her smile, her nice, tender approach, but she was, when she wanted something and when she meant something, she would tell you exactly. And two other friends that we decided to establish the Basra Farah Fund for mothers, for women and children. And I'll let Fawzia talk to you about the mission, the objects we have with this foundation. So thank you very much for introducing Basra to all of us. I want to thank the Somali Women Circle Network for combining these two agenda items tonight, and it's incredible when something works, it just works. And it wasn't planned for a long time, but when I came to the leadership of the Somali Women's Circle Network, and I said I need help, we want to launch a fund, they immediately said, well, there's the 16 days and we can combine it. And there were some incredible synergies that came together. And it's moments like that I am proud of the Ottawa Somali community and proud of the energy of some of the Somali women in this town. So it's humbling and honor to think that this launch is going to also reach out and touch all of you, so that you can also, in a small way, start to take those steps with us and support us in any way you can in honoring Basra Farah and also continuing her legacy. Thank you very much.
We're coming to the section where we have our guest of honor, and obviously the discussion tonight is very important, but also Nuruddin is a very important person. And we have our sister Rahia Abdi, who is a member of the Somali Women's Circle Network.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight for this multi-busy meeting over there. For joining us tonight, it's really, a very important and interesting event that we're having tonight because of the 16 days of activism, the violence against the gender. It was 1995 that the UN decided to remember a woman that has been that left us because of violence, and those women who have been actually were in memory of having this day that we are remembering were 3 sisters from Dominican Republic, and Maribel family sisters. They were killed by a dictator in that country on November 25th, 1960. Simply because they, of course, disagreed with his philosophy of their country. They wanted better future and vision for their country and for their children. And because of it, they paid the price for it. And they were the symbol for this memory. It's their memory that we are honoring, along all the other women that have died on the hands of violence. And Nuruddin, our condolences. We're getting to know Basra Farah. She was a wonderful woman. From those of us who did not know her personally, get to know her tonight, and we are 100% supporting the fund on her honor. Violence, as we know, really does not have a borders, doesn't have a caste, creed, color, or an age. It is the single unifier act that affects everybody in a society. And I think we all need to unite against an attitude and a behavior of violence. And Naima, my friend was saying earlier, it's all about men. But like she said, violence affects everybody. But what we need to do as men and women is to speak up against the violence. Say enough is enough, just stop. This is not acceptable. It doesn't matter where you are, how you're rationalizing it. Violence is a violence. And I'm so glad that we are honoring for those who have died in violence, or about to, because 1 in 3 women are affected in violence, directly or indirectly. We all know someone who has been affected by violence. So it's important that we acknowledge that. It's important that we discuss about violence. And Nuruddin has always been an advocate, really, of violence against, as we said, against the women, particularly Somali women. And you said eloquently that women in Somalia are suffering in all corners of Somalia because culturally, like you described, I had tears in my eyes when you were talking, because we have a culture that in many ways condones violence. I mean, even our saviors the woman is always being minimized, and men as being glorified. And it's always been, even the good things about men turns into a violence. Even the culture, the way we say it, not necessarily the men are going to be doing violence, but the way even the language we use also makes a man, a good man is a man that is courageous, do things in a violent way. That's how the culture, I don't know how in English to say it, but there are a lot of things that are glorified as violence in the culture. So we need to look into that. What I wanted tonight actually to do is a couple of things, because I wanted to have, since you have been patiently listening and taking all our speakers that have spoke for me, I wanted you to maybe have a say in this. So I'm going to ask you a question, and the fact that I don't have a extra mic as I planned, is going to help my plan a little, but I will try to move my own mic around. So I just going to have one question, or thought, really it's not a question, and then perhaps we will have Nuruddin and Fawzia to take a few questions from you, because I'm sure you all wanted to ask questions. And my question then is, as we all know, women is a core of the society. Mothers particularly are the core of society, and we're not going to be here without our mothers. So we know mothers have nurtured us, they raised us, they taught us right from born, and mold us who we are today. And a mother is a woman. So my question is then, when do we then change? I don't know if this question has been asked before, but when do we actually change? And particularly our male counterparts, when do a woman becomes this weak, irrelevant person, from a person who was an idol to you? Moms is strong, moms is intelligent, mom is everything to us when we're growing up, when we're young. Your mom is your superhero. And now we're getting older, and then woman becomes irrelevant. Useless, something that is, we can use as a bunch or whatever. When does that change? When do we switch? And I don't want a simplistic answer. Well, my mom is my mom, and my girlfriend, my wife is my wife. Go beyond that, because mother, there's a gender issue. Your mother is a woman. So that womanness, when did you lose that? I think it's my question. And to add, if you have the power to change today, if you have the power and single power, and you want to use that, how would you make that change to make a better world for women? So I think I'm just combining two questions in one, but think of that, and I think if we have a brave people who want to say something, I'm going to come and I'm going to give you the mic to say a few things. Do you want me?
Yes. Everybody knows who I am, so I'm not even going to go there. But on Saturdays, you can hear me ranting about this exact issue. Last Saturday, we were talking about Ferguson, but we were also talking about the issue of the GM Kamashi and all of the war on women, and girls. Because there is a war, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's rape as a weapon of war in the DRC, that doesn't get talked about enough. Whether in Rwanda, in Afghanistan, it doesn't matter. There is a war going on. And Jackie Lawrence really posed that question very well. She said, this behavior is modeled from somewhere. These boys learn it from someone. They see it somewhere out there in the world. or in their home. There's an uncle who behaves like that, their father behaves like that, and their brother sees it, they see it, all the males see it. The women, the girls in that environment internalize all that and grow up thinking, oh, yeah, so that's the behavior, and that's what's waiting for me, and that's what's expected, etc. I know it's more complicated than that, but Jackie said it well. It comes from somewhere, so you have to look at where it comes from. So the society you were talking about, it's not just Somali society. I'm a Luo from Lake Victoria. Luo society is terrible that way too. And the one thing that's forcing my society to look at the place of women and girls differently and the way they're treated differently, our men are dying of AIDS. They're dropping dead. There are not a lot of them around anymore. So now you have to look at how you reorganize the society as a result of this calamity, which is, HIV, AIDS. But again, in the society, you leave your home and you see attitudes which originally might be foreign to you, but then that's how the rest of society behaves. So you're going to model that because you don't want to stand out, you don't want to be an outcast, etc. So there's the conditioning that has to be looked at, whether it's out in society, in school, because there's the peer pressure thing too. I know here in North America, there's the bullying issue that goes with that. And the White Ribbon Campaign has a very good list of 16 actions to take for 16 days to combat this scourge that is violence against women. And one of them is how boys are raised, how they're taught about manhood. Several of you mentioned masculinity in Somali culture, in Luo culture, my culture, in North American culture. That has to be revisited. That has to be reviewed. And there has to be a consciousness about these behaviors. So I think that's part of the answer.
This week, I just concluded teaching a film that deals with this subject, about this kind of coincidence, and it's Usman Sembene's Molade. I don't know how many of you have seen the film. It's a very disturbing film, and it addresses this very profoundly. And the other coincidence is that my daughter came back from school yesterday. She's at Cadaalad, and she had to go to school today in black because something very tragic had happened to one of their classmates right there, very close to the school, in Beacon Hill North. One of the students, the parents, the father stabbed the mother to death and committed suicide by hanging. And this little kid, a student of Cadaalad, had gone into the house and saw the dad hanging in the basement. The kinds of violence that we witness increasingly, is frightening. At the time you think that the world is becoming, should be becoming racially blind, it seems to look like the very basic instincts are coming back. And there are a number of issues. That the family unit is so central to how we can deal with this kind of violence, all sorts of violence. Because as Sarah had said, there are ways in which we all perform what we live through. And I thought Nuruddin actually brought it so clearly. What you live and breathe sometimes will help. But if we say that, then that looks like it's settled. What happens in cases where you never witnessed such kind of violence and then you go to perform such violence? So I think it's an open conversation, but I'd like to emphasize that it's important not to keep dividing the discussion along the gender lines that puts men in one box and women in the other box. Because like you have said, there's an importance of collaboration. Increasingly, the violence in some cases entails the men inflicting the violence on the women and also inflicting on themselves, as happened to my daughter's classmate. And then she gets some very broken, and the school tries some kind of ways to rally around this student. So it's universal, and I thought that a program like this is very important, and it's part of the reason why we're happy to support it. I think everybody should get involved, but more importantly, we should all promote law and order in Africa, because it is part of the reason why men especially are put in check when they realize that there are actual consequences when that happens. Thank you.
Sarah was talking about, and in particular, there's all kinds of violence being meted against women. But I think there's the mention of the DRC and the mention of all those sort of cultural, embedded, learned, kind of mimicked, whatever it is, in conversations that I have had with my daughter, when there is a conflict like the civil war in Somalia, when there is a conflict like the civil war in Syria, you know, what you said about transformation, how do we end up becoming all of a sudden the punching bag? And I don't want to create this simple dichotomy of men do this to women, but when things fall apart, when violence occurs in a societal level, you see women being victimized disproportionately. And sometimes it's even to take revenge on each other. Men taking revenge on each other, attacking women. So we need to keep the dialogue in the kitchen tables, in the family unit, in sort of talking about it is not okay. It doesn't matter how upset you are with somebody else. It's not okay to take revenge and take it out on women or girls. Thank you.
I was going to say this practically, though. I think we need to look at also what is available for men. Like I've done education around prevention of domestic violence, and one of the programs that was designed called Neighbor Friends and Families, one of it actually has something about how to talk to men, like if you're a neighbor, friend, or family of a man who is involved in violence. But one of the things it recommends is that, you know, seeking counseling, seeking mental health help. But there's one thing, it's very difficult for men to come forward and talk about that, but also there's not a lot of services available. So one of the serious issues is that one thing, you have to create a culture where it's okay for men to talk about all the stresses and issues that are going on, which frankly do sometimes lead to them imploding and taking out their whole family. But then also you have to make sure those services are available. And oftentimes, the way our system works now in Canada with a lot of cuts, there isn't a lot of services available to support them. And also, particularly because we've talked a lot about sexual violence, we have to look at also the role that women play in this. Because unfortunately, and even this is true with mothers, it's how women talk about other women, right? So there's the good girls, and there's the bad girls. I've worked in high schools, and every time I brought the subject up, the girls were like, "Well, yeah, you're more likely to be called a slut by another girl than a slave than a guy." So, particularly in our community, say Muslim communities, we need to look at how we were talking about the veil, how we're talking about, not veiling. We're always putting it between like a virgin and a whore, a good girl and a bad girl. We're playing into this dehumanization of certain types of women. And that plays out in all societies, and that makes it justified to be looking at active violence against women.
Do not have it.
As a community, we have to look at ourselves and then simply say, there is no accidental rape. It cannot happen. It takes such a long time. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. There is this continuous feeling that, they say, women would say no when they actually mean yes, but that is criminal. And the reason is because you put in words into their mouths, and you put in, male perception, self-perception, misperception into a situation in which doesn't exist. Let us simply condemn all types of rape, because there is no accidental rape. It is always intentional. It's always intentional. sounding like a politician now. How we deal with it on a family, basis is, go back to the first person, Rua, who in fact gave us how insecure on a daily, minutely basis women feel. I look over my shoulder. I don't look over my shoulder as a man. I walk straight. Why do I have to look over my shoulder? That is the poem. And that. Any other question?
You mentioned that it was been mentioned that you've lived in 10 African countries over your lifetime, and I'm hoping that it's going to continue on more. How have you been able to see, given your experience, personal experience, in living in different societies, how have you noticed that the issue of women, or violence in general, targeted against women or children or men, different or at least similar to one another, and how was it, and the other question I wanted to ask is, have you noticed, perhaps one of my question is that, have you noticed that if there was empathy that was raised among the perpetrators, whether there be of different genders, how has that shifted the balance into less violence and more understanding and bringing down, again, that targeted violence?
Thank you. In Africa, the unfairness to women occurs. And usually I say to people, if you actually want to study something about rape, you also study society's attitude, men's attitude towards women. And you can find them in the wisdom, in something that passes for society's wisdom. And that's Proverbs. Now, as I'm speaking, I want you to think in your heads, Proverbs, in any language, whether it is in French, in Arabic, in Urdu, in Somali, in Gujarati, in Igbo, in Hausa, in any language in Luo, you would find that the majority of proverbs about women are derogatory, abusive, belittling, denying women their humanity. And because proverbs are known as the wisdom of society, the kernel wisdom of that society, if the wisdom that we pass on in our language, in our ideas, in our poetry, is derogatory of women, you can't expect us to be respectful of women. And that's one of the things that needs to go, therefore, is we have to switch from who we were and reconstruct ourselves and become something different. And therefore create proverbs. I've been trying to create some of these proverbs to make women worthy of the position in which they should hold in our hearts, in our minds, in our psychology, in our whatever. Now, if you ask me, not only Africa, but if we had enough time, I would actually point a finger at somebody and say, give me a proverb about women. And you would actually find the majority of them are bad. Why are they bad? Because society's attitude towards women is bad, is evil. Accidental rape is what we have heard this evening from a gentleman who is very kind and intelligent and a diplomat representing Somalia. So that is what we have. That is what we have. When you leave this room, accidental rape, you think about that. And this is the proverb. The proverbs are being told, we're being told this is the culture. Now, are people kinder to women or less violent to women? No, they're not. They're not. I teach at Bard College in upstate New York. Women are advised advised not to go in certain streets and corners of the college. This is a liberal arts college, one of the most expensive colleges in America. Brown University, every college, every university is advising young women to be very careful. There would have been no need for parents to tell their daughters, be careful, if there had been no need to tell them to beware. So there are all these wolves of men dressed in very intelligent clothes, peaceful looking, but in the majority of men there is a potential of rape. One more question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the point that you made while you were.
The Carleton University, the Institute of African Studies, as well as the Department of English at Carleton University. I also would like to thank all of our speakers, starting with Shamak Abdullahi, Naima Ali, and of course Lua Ali, who actually had to leave. She has another event to attend, so she was kind enough to come in for at least half an hour just to come and perform that amazing poetry. I also want to thank our Master of Ceremony, Hamid Salter, for really this event could not have been possible really without his effort. I also would like to thank all of you really for taking the time to come. We know it's December, it's cold, it's Friday night, but thank you so much for coming out. And just want to take a moment just for us to really remember Zahra Abdullah and her 2 sons who were just killed this past weekend. Really, it's a tragedy. And because, those of you that are Muslims that are here, we want to take the time to really read Fatiha for them and pray for them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them just a moment, please. Ahmed Gure from Hiran Online, that was kind enough to come, being the busiest man that I know. I also would like to thank our videographer, Abdikarim Osman, who has been very kind. Even he's busy, he's got family, and he still came tonight. So thank you, Abdikarim. And lastly, we heard a lot about the Circle. I am one of the board members of the Circle. I joined past July, so I celebrated a year and a half with the Circle. Very proud to be a member of this amazing organization. You heard about what my good friend Fuzia talked about the history. Naima touched about some of the objectives why the Circle exists. But what I'd like to leave you with tonight is why do we do this event? We all know it's an awareness, yes, but really it's to inspire young women, young and old, any woman really, and of course men, to really talk about this issue of violence against women. We all know it exists. It's not something that's new to all of us, but talking about it, you don't hear that a lot. So tonight we want to encourage everybody that this is something that we should all talk about it. And Fahia Ali said earlier that enough is enough. We need to stand up. So again, thank you all so much.